Hello and welcome to Voices of the Dream. Today we are talking to Master Lyon MacKeegan. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Master Lyon MacKeegan. I am a resident of the Barony of Bronzehelm here in the Kingdom of Artemisia. I am the local marshal. I am the Kingdom Rapier Marshal, and currently I'm the Kingdom Rapier Champion here in the Kingdom of Artemisia. I have been fighting and playing in the SCA and specifically in Artemisia for quite some time now. I have had a couple breaks, but I recently come back and ended up here in the Barony of Bronzehelm where I live.
Thank you. And go ahead and tell us your story. I'm very interested to hear more about your persona.
Thank you. So my persona was born out of growing up hearing stories that my grandmother and my mother and my father told me. My grandmother and my mother were from Ireland originally. They came here, they ended up here in the early 60s. And my grandma she liked to tell stories about home because I guess she missed home at some point. When I got older, I started becoming interested in my dad's history. My dad was from Scotland. He had come over with one of his brothers post World War II. And I started getting interested in that history kind of at a young age. And this was pre-SCA for me. When I got older and I discovered the SCA, this was in the early 90s. I started digging more into my own family history because I thought if I was going to make a persona or be something in the SCA, I wanted it to be something that was closely related to where my family was or where my family was from at that time period. And much to my excitement, I had found a period of things that had taken place in Ireland in the early 1600s concerning it was called the 9 Years' War. And basically it was a bunch of Gaelic lords that were trying to retake Ireland from the English. And as it turns out, some of my family was involved with a gentleman named Hugh O'Neill. And he was one of the Gaelic lords trying to retake Ireland. And essentially it did not work out. They failed at a battle called the Battle of Kinsale, where it was pretty much the end of the whole thing and everybody kind of took off. And when they did take off, parts of my family spread out, left Ireland, went to places, like some of them, I guess, went back to Scotland. Some of them ended up in Spain. Some of them ended up in Germany. So as it turns out, the odd thing for me too was, as it turns out, where all of this took place was actually not too far from where my grandmother was from in Ireland. She was from County Cork. And Kinsale is basically just north of County Cork. And you can still find a lot of my family, my Egan family. That's the Irish side. That's where the MacKeegan comes from in the SCA. So the Egan side, there's still a lot of Egans in Ireland. And the stories that I was told was that some of them left and came back, and some of them left and went to Scotland, and some of them left and went to just different places, and some of them were hiding out in England too for a time because they were wanted. So all of this kind of came to me deciding that it would be appropriate for me as a fighter, and I had started out doing armored combat myself, and I was looking to base my persona more in 13th century, 14th century, that era. And when I got more interested in finding out what took place in our period, later period for the SCA is when I discovered these things about my family and what my grandmother had been talking about. And it just consequently at that time I had started doing rapier as well. And for me, it kind of made sense that either way I was going to be a mercenary. That's what I thought I was going to do. I thought I was going to be this Scotch Irish mercenary that would just run around picking fights with people. And the more I looked into it, the more I found that a lot of our family they were just that. They were merchants and mercenaries. And they did travel quite a bit extensively during the 1600s, early 1700s, which is out of period for us, but I still got into that. So what I ended up with was, when I started out, I determined that my character or my persona, because I say character a lot, but I find that character building and persona building, people say D&D and you're like, oh, I've got this character. My persona is that of a Scotch Irish mercenary who travels around Spain and occasionally works for a couple different Spanish houses, but he's always trying to make his way back home in a way, maybe in a way to kind of pick fights and do things like that. That particular period of history is kind of fun for me because I do like the things that were going on. I mean, even though they were kind of horrible, but they're interesting. I do like the things that were going on in Ireland and England at the time, and the things that you can kind of trace back to, where your family history comes from. To me is really interesting because the way I see it, I'm kind of walking around in the shoes of one of my ancestors while they're going about their business, doing what they're doing in Ireland or Spain, in the early 1600s. And I find that's a lot of fun. And then for the for the part where I'm involved in the Tudor period, that's also part of that history, because in that time frame is when the Tudor period really is picking up. And that time frame is when things get really interesting, when Queen Elizabeth dies and there kind of becomes this vacuum in a way. And I picture it as what my SCA, and I hate saying it this way, but excuse me, I kind of pictured as what my SCA alter ego would do, as in, would he go and fight, or would he would he hang back and just watch everything go down? And I feel like I would fight more than anything. So that's what pushes me towards the fighting end. And I guess on from there, it's pretty much just like me reminding myself, when I jump into another piece of this history and I look forward even beyond our period, that, kind of helps me to kind of connect with my grandmother's side of the family, which in a way I don't really know a lot about them. I know enough that they were kind of not great people in a way. Some of them were kind of scary. They really did pick a lot of fights. But for the most part, it kind of helps me kind of put that marker in that book, as far as, okay, I know where my Irish family comes from, and I know how these things worked back then, and that gives me an idea of what to do with my persona and how my persona in the SCA is. But really, what it just really comes down to is that my persona in the SCA and my persona outside of the SCA is the same person. So I study this stuff outside of the SCA, and it's just it's how I use it in the SCA. So the clothes that he wears, for instance. So and I've done a lot of research on this. So just pretty much from the ground up, like the boots that he's wearing are more Spanish type of boots. So he might have picked those up in Spain. The The pants are very Italian. They're very baggy. They're very comfortable. But you probably picked those up in Italy somewhere. The shirt, quite obviously, and the weapons. I prefer Spanish weapons, which to say that is like, oh, it's a Spanish weapon. Well, those weapons were all over the place at the time, but it's very obviously a Spanish weapon. And then just how he dresses, and you can't tell that he looks like someone from Tudor England, but when you run into him and he starts talking about being a mercenary and where he's from, then you're like, oh, well, he's hiding out. He's not. He knows people are looking for him, so he's working and staying on the move just in case. So, and I've had a lot of fun with that because in real life, when I was in the SCA in my early days, late 90s, early 2000s, I was moving around a lot. So I found myself in different kingdoms where different personas. So I found myself in different kingdoms where there was a different mix of personas. So a lot of people would be like, Irish, living in Spain? I'm like, and then I'd have to explain it. And that was like the best part, because then I could explain that whole thing and see the look on their face when they're just like, mercenary, huh? You got anything to do this event? So that was kind of like the punchline a few times is, oh, you really are a mercenary. And I'm like, yes, that's why I told that story. I'm at the event. I need to eat. If you want to pay me, I can eat. So stuff like that. It really became, in a way, in that time period when I was playing in the SCA, it really became that I was the mercenary that I wanted to be, that my persona was. And I got to apply that quote unquote trade in a way, do you know what I mean? In the SCA. So yeah, I was a mercenary and everything, but it was all for good fun, and it was a matter of, I met a lot of people and I made friends with a lot of people in a lot of different kingdoms, and they were mercenaries, and they did the same thing. They traveled from different events in different places. So, just to kind of, at the end of that, where I ended up was, and this is kind of a weird thing that I did, and this is kind of what my persona did at the same time. When I was tapped to be a mod, I took all of my mercenary pieces, the stuff that I carried as a mercenary. I'm like pistols. I must have 5 or 6 RBGs, a giant musket, a trade axe, just weapons all over the place. You know what I mean? So many things that I collected as a mercenary. And when I got tapped to be a mod, I started putting these things away, and I stopped doing mercenary work. And I started asking myself, if someone had come to my persona and said, hey, we're going to make you a noble, what do you think about this? What would you do? And honestly, he would be like, well, at this point, I've been a mercenary long enough. I'm not getting any younger. Moving around is getting to be kind of a pain in the butt. So, what would I do? I would find a good place to stay. I'd find a good place to live. And I would continue doing my trade as a swordsman. And I would become, rather than working for a household or households, I would basically become part of one, or become part of a group, and continue doing what I was doing. My persona would continue doing what he was doing the same way. And it's kind of funny how, I guess you could say, life imitates art in a way. So that's where my persona ended up. He ended up staying in one place in Spain, becoming a noble, and becoming someone who is basically helpful to the community. It is, I don't want to say looked up to, because I'm still not sure if that's the case with me yet. I know that there's people that just kind of raise an eyebrow when I show up and they're like, oh, there's some bad puns coming. Oh no. Um, so I like to think that that's the same for my persona as well, that people would be like, oh, well, there's Lion, you know. Um, and that's the other thing too, is that my name in the SCA is my name outside of the SCA, which couldn't have been, that transition was so easy. So just a lot of things just made sense. So um the rest of it comes down to is I was like developing my persona. I started deciding like what type of clothes he was wearing was important, and how they looked and what they would have meant, you know, in that era, and the colors that he wears and stuff like that. So that's what throws people off when they hear I'm Scotch Irish, because I'm wearing very obvious bright colored type of Spanish kind of clothes from that time period, you know, bright colored doublet and everything, and you'd think I should be wearing a kilt. Well, I have one. I just don't wear it that often. Um, I started thinking about clothes, and I started thinking about fighting styles, what things I would have learned um, in that time period, like me or my persona. So a lot of that, I adopted a lot of my fighting styles for what I would have learned in that time period. So I got very interested in a couple of the period masters, like centered right on that time period, and I studied a lot of that. Um, Ultimately, the fighting style that I ended up picking up is a combination of a bunch of different period fighting styles. It's kind of a mishmash, but it works. And I persona wise, I blame that on him having traveled to so many places and learned to fight from so many people, that it's just all jumbled in his head, and it just kind of comes out that way when he's fighting. Um, yeah, that's that's kind of how I see him. He's not totally crazy. He's got some bad puns and everything. Um, he does like to fight, so I mean that's fair. Um, Beyond that, the work that I've done to get, well, I don't want to say work, but when I say work, it kind of sounds like, oh, I did this work. You know, it was really mainly just curiosity. So my curiosity was to go and find out everything that I could about Ireland in that time period, and kind of adopt um, what my persona, the way my persona would think for what's going on, and not so it would come out in a poor way, you know, like to be negative or anything like that, but so when it came to having to, you know, choose sides, or having to look at how one way of life was ending and another way is picking up. And this is what I'm speaking of when I say the Gaelic lords, they were done, and they basically left. And I think around about, if I'm right, this is like 1606, 1607. They're gone. They're out of there. And the funny thing is that the area that all of this took place is they're they're bringing in people from Scotland and people from England who are kind of taking over this area and taking over as like farmers and running this area, which is now that's the other half of my family. That's my dad's half of the family. That's Scottish. And it's kind of fun, like looking at that from that perspective, going, well, can I sit with this? Is this okay? Or do I just keep traveling and doing my thing? So keep traveling and do my thing, be a mercenary, and then eventually settle down. But occasionally go back to Scotland or Ireland and, you know, pick a fight. So just to see if they're, you know, see if they're on it or if they remember me, that sort of thing. That's really where I leave I leave the end open, because it's kind of a story that keeps getting told until I can't tell it anymore, or, you know. And I'd like to say it's always changing, but it's not. Like the basis is there, but the things that take place in the SCA and the literal events that I go to in the SCA, they get logged in the way of, in my brain, they get logged in the way of my persona's traveling. He meets a Spaniard. My persona is in, another kingdom, and he meets he meets someone that was family long removed, and that's another MacKeegan. So there is actually other MacKeegans running around out there. And they're in different kingdoms, and we're kind of separated out, but that's how I kind of adopt that into that persona is when I meet people or I make friends with people, in my brain it gets logged into my head. So and then the other one, so I recently just got married, and my wife is new to the SCA, and she's trying to develop more of her persona. And apparently, me talking about Scotland and Ireland is very infectious, because now she's she's looking at Scottish, Irish personas and what they would have been wearing in those time periods and stuff like that. So now her and I are developing a corollary in our personas as to where her persona was when my persona showed up, and what she was doing, and that sort of stuff. So that's how the story, like, it builds when you meet these people and you have these relationships, and then you find that there's similarities, or there's something that you guys, the two of you, your friends or your girlfriend or wife in this case, find that you like, that are similar. Then you start building that together. And to me, that's one of the more fun aspects, is that you find someone who's like-minded, and you build that up, and you study together, and you do the research together, and it just to me, that's kind of what makes all of this worth it, is finding someone and causing them to go crazy about tartan patterns, and how to build cloaks, and how to fight, and all the things that go along with it. It's kind of a good trade, because if you've been doing it long enough, and I think you know what I mean by that, if you have been doing it long enough, and you kind of have that, you get that refresher when someone new comes in, and they're like, well, what should I do? And the first thing out of your mouth is, well, I'm a Scotch-Irish mercenary living in Spain, and this is what I've been doing for the last, I don't want to say how long. And then you tell them the whole story, and they're like, wow, that's really cool. Where did you find all this? And then you give them pretty much every resource that you can. And at 3 a.m, you're like, darn it, I forgot to tell them that one. I like stuff like that. I like doing the research part of that. And I guess you could call it world building. I like the world building that takes place when you're developing your persona. And I know I kind of off tracked a little bit, but in a way, I think your persona, who you are in the SCA, should be your persona. Well, in a big way, not just in a way, it should be. Your persona inside the SCA is what your persona is outside of the SCA. I mean, that way you're not, this is just my opinion, but that way you're not adopting something that is false. I am a huge smart ass. Sorry for saying it that way, but I bad puns, and that's what my persona does. The difference here is that when my persona does it, usually he has a sword in his hand and he tries to back it up. So that's that's the best part right there. That's one of my favorite parts. Yeah, I'd like to say there's really an end to it, but there's not. So I'm going to leave it open like that.
Thank you very much for sharing your SCA story with us, your persona story. I love some of your insights on that about persona being who you are in and out of the SCA. So,
Thank you.
thank you again, Master MacKeegan, for joining us. And Thank you, everybody, for listening to Voices of the Dream.